On 6 January 1993, 23-year-old Bonnie Haim disappeared from her home in Jacksonville, Florida. She was a young wife and mother, married to Michael Ray Haim, and they had a 3-year-old son, Aaron. What began as a missing person report would become a long unsolved homicide case that remained cold for more than 2 decades before it was finally resolved. Bonnie and Michael had married several years earlier. In the days before her disappearance, investigators later learned that their marriage had been troubled. According to police reports and testimony at trial, Bonnie had made plans to leave Michael and take their young son with her. She had reportedly secured an apartment and was preparing for a separation. On the night she vanished, Bonnie's car, a Toyota Camry, was found parked in the Jacksonville International Airport parking lot the next day. The vehicle appeared abandoned, and inside, police observed a shoe print on the driver's side floorboard that later matched a unique pair of shoes owned by Michael Haim. Investigators treated the situation as unusual given Bonnie's disappearance and the location where the car was found. Bonnie's purse, containing her identification, credit cards, and cash, was found discarded in a trash bin behind a hotel near the airport. These discoveries heightened concern among law enforcement that Bonnie's disappearance was not voluntary. Michael told police the couple had argued the night she went missing and that she had left without their son. He did not initially alert authorities that his wife was missing. In the immediate aftermath, investigators interviewed family members, friends, and neighbors in an effort to understand Bonnie's last known activities. Her young son, Aaron, was interviewed by child welfare workers shortly after her mother vanished. At the age of 3, Aaron made statements implying that Daddy hurt Mommy and that his father had harmed his mother. These early statements were significant but inconsistent and at the time were not deemed sufficient to support criminal charges. With no body recovered and limited forensic evidence, law enforcement encountered challenges in building a solid criminal case. Michael Haim remained a central person of interest, but the absence of physical evidence meant prosecutors could not establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. As the months turned to years, the case grew cold. Investigators continued to keep the file open, but active leads were scarce and no arrest was made. In 2003, Aaron, now living with a different family after being adopted, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against his biological father. The court ruled in his favor, concluding that Michael was responsible for Bonnie's death under the civil standard of proof. As a result of the judgment, Aaron was awarded the family's former home in Jacksonville, worth a multi-million-dollar judgment. Despite this civil outcome, no criminal charges were filed at that time because of insufficient physical evidence. The case remained dormant until December 2014, when new developments brought the investigation back into focus. Aaron, now an adult, was working on renovations at his childhood home that he had inherited through the civil lawsuit. Workers discovered a concrete slab in the backyard. When they removed it, Aaron used a sledgehammer to break through the slab and uncovered bones wrapped in a plastic bag. At first, Aaron described the object he found as resembling a coconut, but as he cleared away material with his brother-in-law, he realized what he held was a human skull. DNA testing later confirmed that the remains belonged to his mother, Bonnie Haim. Once Bonnie's skeletal remains were identified, the case transitioned from a missing person investigation to a homicide with a body recovered. Forensic examination concluded that the remains were consistent with a homicide by unspecified means. A .22 caliber shell casing was also found in the burial area near the remains, and Michael Haim was known to own a rifle of that caliber, according to court records and the arrest affidavit. Police reopened the investigation with renewed determination. Based on the new physical evidence and Aaron's early statements to authorities, investigators sought an arrest warrant for Michael Haim in connection with Bonnie's murder. In 2015, law enforcement located Michael Haim in North Carolina and arrested him on a charge of second-degree murder in Bonnie's death, returning him to Florida to face prosecution. In preparation for trial, prosecutors assembled evidence that included Aaron's statements from 1993, the discovery and identification of his mother's remains, the forensic findings, and other details about the couple's life and marriage. Aaron testified during the trial, recalling aspects of what he had told investigators as a child and the moment he discovered the remains decades later. The defense challenged the admissibility and reliability of the earlier statements and sought to argue that the evidence did not conclusively prove that Michael killed his wife or that he was responsible for burying her remains in the backyard. Michael maintained he was not involved in Bonnie's disappearance or death. Despite these challenges, the prosecution's case prevailed in April 2019. A jury found Michael Ray Haim guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Bonnie Haim. The conviction came more than 26 years after Bonnie vanished, marking a significant resolution in a case that had puzzled law enforcement and haunted the family for decades. Following his conviction, Michael Haim was sentenced to life in prison. The sentence reflected not only the seriousness of the crime, but also the prolonged impact on the victim's family, particularly on Aaron, who had spent much of his life without knowing what happened to his mother. Prosecutors emphasized the emotional trauma experienced by Aaron and other family members, noting that long-standing uncertainty about what occurred had inflicted deep psychological effects. The resolution of the Bonnie Haim case provided long-awaited answers for her family after more than 2.5 decades. Until the discovery of her remains in 2014, law enforcement had lacked the physical evidence needed to arrest and prosecute a suspect. The eventual excavation in the backyard provided the crucial link, allowing forensic scientists to match the bones to Bonnie and enabling prosecutors to secure a conviction against her husband. At sentencing, family members expressed that the conviction, while not restoring their loss, offered a sense of justice and closure that had been missing for years. Bonnie's sister stated during court proceedings that the family could now begin to heal, even though they still mourned her absence and the years lost without answers. The case illustrates how a missing person story can evolve over time and how advances in forensic science, combined with fortuitous discoveries, may ultimately bring resolution to cold cases. It also highlights the role that early witness statements, even from a very young child, can play in shaping investigations, especially when corroborated by later evidence. Bonnie Haim's disappearance and homicide became widely known as a cold case for many years, studied by criminal justice professionals, and featured in media accounts of long unsolved crimes. The eventual breakthrough underscores the importance of preserving evidence and re-examining old cases with fresh eyes and new techniques. Today, the official record reflects that Bonnie's disappearance was not voluntary, but the result of a homicide, and that Michael Ray Haim was found guilty and sentenced for her murder. The case remains a testament to the persistence of investigators and the impact of critical evidence discovered long after a crime was committed. On September 1, 1966, Everett "Red" Nelson Delano, age 49, was shot and killed during an apparent robbery at Sanborn's garage in Andover, New Hampshire. Delano was a resident of Wilmot Flat, New Hampshire, a retired U.S. Navy veteran, and a family man with a wife and 3 children. At the time of his death, in addition to his Navy service, he worked as a night watchman at Colby Sawyer College and part-time at the garage where he was killed. His murder would remain unsolved for more than 5 decades, becoming the oldest cold case in New Hampshire history, until investigators finally identified a suspect decades later. On the morning of September 1, 1966, Delano was found unconscious on the floor of the office at Sanborn's garage. Police were called to the scene after customers and neighbors discovered him. He had suffered multiple gunshot wounds to the head. Delano was transported to Mary Hitchcock Hospital in Lebanon, where he died the following day due to his injuries. The murder occurred during business hours, and for months afterward, the initial investigation aimed to determine who had shot him and why. Early investigators treated the death as part of an apparent robbery of the garage because money was missing from the cash register. Approximately $75 to $100 was taken, but investigators noted that a separate box containing about $500 hidden under the counter had not been taken, suggesting that theft may not have been the sole motive. At the time, police also found a .22 caliber bullet or casing at the scene, which indicated the type of weapon used. Multiple firearms throughout the local area were collected for ballistic testing, but none matched the shell found at the scene. The murder weapon was never recovered. At the crime scene, officers observed that a bathroom sink faucet was running. Detectives believed this suggested that the perpetrator had briefly used the bathroom and inadvertently left the water on before leaving. Investigators lifted fingerprints from the faucet and other items, including the sink and the soap dispenser. These latent prints were photographed and sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, shortly after the crime. But in the 1960s, fingerprint databases were incomplete, and New Hampshire had not yet begun fully participating in the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS. As a result, the prints did not lead to an identification at that time. The original investigation in 1966 saw many leads pursued. Officers interviewed individuals in the community, reviewed testimonies of those present at or near the garage that day, and attempted to trace any suspicious vehicles or persons. They also carried out searches of local terrain and waterways, including the Blackwater River, in hopes of finding the weapon used in the shooting. None of these efforts produced a suspect, and after months of inquiries, the case gradually stalled. By the end of 1966, without an arrest or substantial evidence linking any individual to the murder, the case was classified as unsolved. For many years, Delano's murder remained an unresolved homicide. It sat in state records, collected dust in file cabinets, and became part of New Hampshire's cold case backlog. Members of Delano's family and friends continued to wonder what happened, but decades passed with little to no movement in the investigation. Delano's death was among more than 100 cases that, over time, had grown cold in the state's records. In 2009, the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit was established within the state's Department of Justice to revisit unresolved homicides. Initially, Delano's case was not included in the unit's early reviews, likely due to its age and the fact that it had been long neglected in official filings. It was not until 2013 that a relative of Everett Delano contacted the Cold Case Unit and asked why his father's case had not been formally reviewed. This inquiry led the unit to reopen the investigation after more than 45 years of inactivity. As investigators re-examined the evidence, they realized that latent fingerprints from the 1966 crime scene had not been entered into the FBI's AFIS database because the system was not fully operational in the 1960s, and New Hampshire did not begin submitting prints until 1998. This oversight meant that the prints had never been compared against the broader national database. When the prints were finally submitted to AFIS as part of the cold case review, the system produced a match to a known individual, Thomas Cass, a man from Orleans, Vermont. At the time of the murder in 1966, Thomas Cass was about 20 years old. Thomas Cass had an extensive criminal record spanning decades. He had been convicted in the late 1960s in Massachusetts for larceny and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Later convictions included robbery while masked and armed with a sawn-off shotgun, aggraved assault, escape from custody, theft, and other offenses in both Vermont and New Hampshire through the 1970s and 80s. Despite this criminal history, he was never connected to Delano's murder during earlier investigations. When questioned by investigators after the 2013 forensic breakthrough, Cass initially denied any knowledge of the crime and claimed he had never been to Sanborn's garage. However, he acknowledged other criminal activity during the interview. Police met with Cass multiple times during the reinvestigation, including in 2013 and again in early 2014. During these interviews, investigators informed him that evidence connected him to the Delano case, though they did not immediately disclose the specific forensic findings to him. Cass requested a lawyer and maintained his innocence. Law enforcement obtained a search warrant for his home in Vermont, seeking additional evidence connected to the 1966 murder. No firearm or direct physical evidence of the crime was found at his residence. Shortly after the execution of the search warrant, authorities in Vermont were notified that Thomas Cass had died by suicide on February 24, 2014 at his home in Orleans. He was 67 years old at the time of his death. His partner called 911 saying that Cass believed police were closing in on him in connection with an old homicide investigation. A firearm was found at the scene, and his death was ruled self-inflicted. Statements from people close to Cass indicated that he had expressed fear of returning to prison and, in the past, had remarked that you never talk about something that has no statute of limitations, referring to the fact that murder has no statute of limitations in the United States. In February 2019, the New Hampshire Attorney General's office publicly announced that the Cold Case Unit had determined that Thomas Cass was responsible for the 1966 murder of Everett Delano. The announcement stated that the fingerprint evidence collected at the crime scene and preserved over the years, combined with the totality of investigatory findings and statements, established beyond a reasonable doubt that Cass shot and killed Delano during the robbery at Sanborn's garage. Because Cass was deceased, he could not be charged and the case was administratively closed and resolved. In an official statement, members of Delano's family expressed gratitude to the Cold Case Unit and all the investigators who spent countless hours reviewing the case and bringing long-awaited answers. They noted that for more than 5 decades they had not known what happened to their father, and that the resolution provided them with a measure of closure after years of uncertainty. The family also thanked neighbors and friends who had originally assisted in the investigation in 1966 and had supported them throughout the years. The resolution of Everett Delano's case served as a reminder to law enforcement agencies that cold cases can be solved even after many years if evidence is preserved and combined with modern forensic technology. The use of databases such as AFIS and the willingness of relatives to re-engage with law enforcement proved instrumental in bringing clarity to a crime that once seemed permanently unsolvable. Investigators emphasized that murder is one crime that has no statute of limitations, and that advancements in technology have allowed priority to be given to cases previously hampered with limited investigatory tools. Documentation from the Attorney General's office and the Cold Case Unit explains that Delano's fingerprints, properly entered into AFIS years after the crime, were ultimately the key to identifying the suspect. These fingerprints preserved from the 1966 crime scene were photographed and stored, but remained unexamined in the context of a national database until the Cold Case Review. Without the decision to reopen the case and enter the prints into the system, the identification of Thomas Cass may never have occurred. Everett Delano's murder remained unsolved for more than 50 years, illustrating how evidence that once yielded no leads can become crucial decades later. The case's resolution provided closure not only for Delano's family, but also offered encouragement to others pursuing answers in cold cases. Through persistent investigatory efforts, careful evidence preservation, and advances in forensic technology, law enforcement was able to finally determine what happened on that morning in September 1966.